Yeah, I better send it over here. Still a little bit live. There? Okay, excellent. My name is Sharon Kaplan. I'm the museum educator here at the JSMA, and I'm pleased that you've joined us this evening for an unusual Tuesday evening program. We also have a program tomorrow evening related to Leslie Dill's Poetic Visions and a concert on Sunday, so we hope you'll come back many times this week and the rest of the term as well. I have a couple of announcements. The first is that we are running a visitor survey this week in particular. You might have seen it on the back table. We'd really appreciate getting to know more about our visitors, so if you would take the time to take the quick survey afterwards and give it to me, and I will give you a little gift from the museum. So there's an incentive tonight. And we'd also really like to thank the School of Journalism and Communications for their sponsorship of this program this evening. So we're very grateful for their support. And I will pass this off to Ben Saunders, who curated the exhibition of Charles Schulz, because he will do a much better job of introducing all of what's going on with the exhibition and the program tonight.
Thank you, Sharon. Well, and thank you everybody for coming out. You're not going to hear too much from me this evening, I hope. I'm very excited to be interviewing the wonderfully talented Jan Eliot about her work and her friendship with Charles Schulz. I should make a couple of announcements myself for the students who are here in pursuit of extra credit. There is a piece of paper next to the surveys that Sharon mentioned on the table at the back of the room, which says student register on the top. So when you leave, please sign your name on that register and you will get your extra credit for this occasion. I want to echo what Sharon said about the surveys. It's very helpful to the museum to have those, and also personally to thank the sponsors for the event. Okay, so without further ado, Jan's Stone Soup is probably known to all of you. It is certainly one of my favorite cartoons in the in our local press, where I believe it actually started, right? As it began in the Register Guard. In 95, am I right?
It just started as a weekly strip in 1990.
Oh, really? And
they gave me a weekly spot off the comics page so that I could have so I was in a feature section, so that I could have a weekly spot, because I had a day job.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And well, not to get ahead of ourselves then, let's start with, I'm very curious about this because in my reading about the biographies of various cartoonists, I'm struck by how often people in the profession know that that's what they want to be, and often very young know that that's what they want to be. I mean, that's sort of the strangest thing about Charles Schulz in a way is that he wanted to be a cartoonist at the age of 6. And so when did you know that you wanted to be a cartoonist?
I'm a late bloomer. I was always an artist. I was a doodler. I was one of those people that ruined my homework with doodles in the margins. I always drew and painted. I did sets in high school for the theater department. I was always doing that. But it wasn't until I was about 29 that I was complaining to a friend. I was recently divorced. I was poor, and I didn't have any real creative outlet. I had a really kind of boring first job after college sort of thing. And I was complaining that I didn't have studio money, I didn't have materials money. And she said, well, I think you should try drawing cartoons. I think you're really funny. And I had never thought about it. I knew how to draw. I had taken lots of drawing classes, but I had never really studied cartooning. And but my education is 2 years of art at Southern Illinois University, and then I came here to the University of Oregon, where I finished up after having children in English and Women's Studies. And so I was also interested in writing, and the idea of writing a comic strip was very appealing to me. And so she pretended to be my editor, and every Friday I had a cartoon due, because again, I had kids and a day job, so it's easy to not do things unless there's some kind of deadline. So I said to her, I don't know, what would I write about? And she said, well, you write about your life. And that was actually pretty easy to make fun of being broke and, and my kids were young and squabbly, and there were a lot of fights and how we dealt with that. And that all ended up in the cartoons. So after I had done 10 cartoons for her, I decided I needed another benchmark, and so I took them to an alternative newspaper that used to be in Eugene called the Willamette Valley Observer. And I just wanted the editor to give me feedback, and he actually liked it well enough that he gave me a spot. So I had this weekly spot, which meant I had a deadline. So it wasn't until I was 29 that I actually thought to do cartoons. And so I had to go buy these books that you can probably still find at Smith's called The Secrets of Professional Cartooning and Behind the Strip, Backstage or something at the strips. I think Mort Walker wrote one.
There are lots
Yeah,
of those kinds of books. I think Sparky, you referred to one as well.
Yeah. So that was how I learned to use like what materials and what's the proportion and what are the rules. My first few strips were like they disappeared in print. You don't always know how things are going to translate into print and newsprint, and so I kind of learned on the job.
So you've obviously then you didn't begin with Stone Soup. Clearly there were other pieces. Did you? We have an example, I think, of one of your early cartoons. Yeah, this is which is also you mentioned women's studies. This clearly is a feminist theme cartoon. Maybe we should give the audience a moment or two to take it in.
Can you read it, or do you want me to read it?
Go ahead and read it.
I'll read it. All feminism, excuse me, women's studies major. All feminism translates into men are jerks, men are jerks, men are jerks. Hey, pro-female does not translate into anti-male. Feminism promotes the strengthening of the status of women, not the demise of men. Oh, right. That's what you say. But from where I sit, it's an attempt to emasculate men and threaten the very fabric of society. Men are such jerks.
So where did that first appear?
I actually wrote that after my husband broke up with me in the Excelsior, in the bar at the Excelsior.
It's quite restrained.
There was this period before we got married where we were a little up and down. This is probably from about 1988. I had, with the Willamette Valley Observer, I had written a strip called Patience and Sarah, which was a single mom and her daughter. It's sort of a very spare version of what I do now. And then, because I couldn't sell it enough to make a living, I started trying other things. I tried getting single panel cartoons into magazines. I tried greeting cards. Anything I could think of. And this was in that phase of just doing things that I could sell to different markets and try to get published. I really like it, though.
So, as you already mentioned, then you first sold Stone Soup to the Register Guard in 1990.
I was in the Observer for 4 or 5 years. I was offered a syndication contract in 1982 by United Media in New York. I had the opportunity to go show my work in New York and meet a lot of greats like Nicole Hollander and Trina Robbins, and then some classic people like George Booth and Mort Walker and all these great cartoonists. But I also met syndicate people, and I did receive a contract for Patience and Sarah at that time. But when I got home and read it, the very first paragraph said that I would be giving up the rights to everything I would ever do in perpetuity, which is forever. So, and if you all know the story of Superman, that means you could create something lovely and never again. They could have fired me and hired someone else to do it, and
They bought Lock, Stock, and Barrel for
Lock, Stock, and Barrel.
$130.
Yeah,
They were
yeah.
signatures were
Right,
paid for Superman.
right.
$130.
Yeah. So I thought I could negotiate my way out of that clause, and instead the door was slammed in my face. So I was a little discouraged at this point. I had been trying for 5 years to make something happen with cartooning. I turned my attention to graphic design and advertising, and I had children to raise and send to college, and I needed to do something else. But the cartooning kind of followed me, and I missed publishing. So in 1988, when I remarried and I didn't have to bear the burden of everything myself, I decided to try developing another strip. And so I took the Patience and Sarah concept and expanded it with more characters. And the first thing I thought of was I wanted it to be 2 sets of sisters. I wanted the older sisters and the younger sisters. I have 2 daughters, so I wanted more of the writing of that relationship. And then I do have a sister, although we're not close. I didn't ever live with her, but it's Eugene, and people, especially in the 80s, lots of single moms sharing houses and all that kind of stuff. And so I often had roommates with other kids, which actually is who Joan was based on, as my friend Colette and her little boy, who was born while they lived with us. So I just started trying again, and I went to the Register Guard every couple of weeks for actually 8 months with samples, and got a pat on the head. And but then they had an editorial change, and the new young editor, I think, wanted to maybe make a mark, and so he offered to give me a spot, and I didn't want a daily spot because newspapers pay $25 a week for peanuts. It's peanuts what they pay, and that's what syndication is for. You get in a lot of papers, and that adds up. They pay based on circulation, so little papers pay very little, and big papers pay more. So the Register Guard is a paper in the middle. It's about $25 a week. So I couldn't make a living on one paper. So I asked for a weekly spot. And it was a great gift that they made a place for a comic strip in a Sunday feature section, just so I could have a spot every week. So
there's an interesting tradition there of comic strips that get that don't start out on the comics page, actually. I mean, George Harriman's another example that you share this with. So Stone Soup might be classified then as a kind of a modern family strip, and clearly the ideas were gestating for a long time. I have a sort of I thought an iconic image of modern family cartoons there.
Yeah.
So, but how well established were these characters then when you actually started working on Stone Soup as the title and concept? And I'm thinking of well, let's start with the two girls, with Holly and Alex. This is a nice early Holly and Alex.
This is a very early strip. This is probably from the first few months of Stone Soup after syndication. The strip was weekly under the title Sister City for 5 years. And then in '95, Universal Press syndicated it. And I kind of reworked everything that I'd done in those 5 years to start the first 6 months of Stone Soup. But it was really just a name change. And I'd like to say that they didn't like Sister City because they thought that it would poll as too ardently feminist in the South.
Really?
Just because of the word sister, apparently. But I didn't care. I mean, I did care, but it's a title, it's a name, it's okay. So this is Holly and Alex. I have two girls. They never actually did this, but this is the older one crabbing at the younger one, and the younger one overslept and she's mad, and her sister didn't bother to wake her up, and in the end there, the sister says, "How do I look?" And this is her great revenge. She says, "Great," and in fact, her skirt is tucked in her underpants, and there are more strips following this. She's going to go to school like that and not discover it for quite a while. So, the characters, having done Patience and Sarah for 5 years, the basic mother-daughter characters were really, I mean, Patience, who was the mother, which was meant to be ironic, was so strong in my mind that when I doodled, I would doodle her. You know, I mean, she was very much me of an era. And the daughter, Sarah, was more me as a child. But when I started doing this strip, it wasn't my daughter's personalities, but it was the relationship between the two, the siblings, the competitiveness, the family dynamics. I mean, by the time I got syndicated, I had done Sister City for about 4 years, and then, Patience and Sarah for 4 years, and Sister City for 5. So I had a really strong sense of characters. Yeah.
Does this mean, though, that you were already planning? I mean, I'm thinking here of Wally here, who, for people who don't know the strip, will ultimately end up marrying Val's sister Joan, but he starts out here as the guy next door. Did you know when you introduced him that the marriage was going to happen?
No. When the strip was syndicated, I didn't even have a male character yet. At least I don't think I did. I didn't have a male character for quite a long time other than Little Max. And one of the main reason I didn't have a male character is because I wanted to develop a male character that was not a target. I am divorced and remarried. I like my first husband very much. He's a perfectly nice person. He's the father of my children. I didn't want to create an ex-husband, for instance, who was evil or, and it was, by this time in '95, we'd had a lot of jokes in feminism about men and their bad the men are jerks thing. I mean, it's enough, So I really wanted to create a man that was more like my father, who was my ideal guy. He was a sweet guy who did his own shirts and cooked breakfast for us. And so I introduced Wally as kind of modeled after my friend Wally, who lives here in Eugene, and my dad. And so I had a real clear sense of the kind of person he would be, and that he would be kind of a schlumpy guy and not handsome, but he would be... Yeah,
that's very... you make that part of the comedy in this.
Yeah. Here, this is... See, Joan, who is on the right here in this first panel, has a bad a bad history with men. She has a trail of bad love affairs behind her. We don't see those in the strip. We just see the consequence, which is Max, for one thing. And she's living with Val, and Val would really like her to move on. And Val is encouraging her to meet this guy, and this is not her type. You know, she's the woman who always sort of got the bad boys. And so she's trying to be realistic and say, okay, I'll look for the qualities that build a healthy, stable relationship. And then she goes to meet him, and he says, hello, you must be Joan. I'm your neighbor, Wally. And she thinks, oh, my God, he's a comb-over. And then Max is thinking, because he can read her thoughts, steady, Mom, he can cook. So I didn't intend, the premise of the strip was the two sisters in a household with Mom upstairs and the two daughters. And the idea of having one of them get married was not something I intended at all. The problem is that you introduce characters and they take on a life of their own. And one of the things with Wally was that he was such a nice guy that I would get mail from people who would say, please don't let anything bad happen to Wally. And so, like, having Joan break his heart at some point, or, you know, I mean, it seemed like people would hate me if I didn't do something nice for Wally at some point in time. So eventually it became clear that Wally and Joan were going to have to get married, and then I had to figure out how to keep everyone together so I can try. The fact that he was the next door neighbor and they could just move next door and now live across the fence from each other means that we still have the big blended family, but we have two households, which actually has served me really well in the end.
So from these inauspicious beginnings,
Right.
there's hope out there, guys, if you... Okay, so here, some of the other characters I just thought you might want to talk about how they developed. This is a classic grandma strip. So.
When I started the strip, the grandmother character was based on my mother, and my mother was a smart and cranky person. And so I made Grandma was kind of like, she was sort of the critic in the background in the beginning. But I'll confess, as I got older I'm actually a grandmother now, I didn't want her to be that cranky person anymore. I wanted her to reflect something else. And so this indicates a place where I decided to start giving her more of a life of her own. And she has been encouraged to get out of the house by Val and go down to the senior center and find something to do. And little does they know that what they were offering at the senior center was a class on painting nudes, and she, of course, gravitated right to that. And so this is when they've gone down to the senior center to see the show, and she's the only one with a nude on exhibit. Everyone else has nice baskets of fruit and things like that. And she says, I don't know why you're upset. Museums are full of nudes by famous artists. But, Mom, you're not a famous artist, and this is a senior center. Your nude is just embarrassing everyone. And then you see these ladies coming through. Make way, down in front. Are photographs allowed? And she says, oh, yeah, they look embarrassed. And then the last lady says, are you going to do a series? And I'm proud to say that this was purchased by the Kinsey Institute for their erotic art museum.
Oh, really? Oh, that's great. Yeah.
They wanted to, they have a whole section on sexuality at different ages, and so they bought several of the grandma strips, because there's more of these, of the grandma strips where she's being rather outrageous. And, so.
And did you get feedback from fans about this too, or what kind of
the senior
response
center, Campbell Senior Center bought one of these. They really liked it. They really liked it.
There's another character that I know
so
you have a great story about. So.
just to go back to the grandma for a
sure,
minute.
Yeah.
So what happens after this with Grandma is that because I wanted to be, I love travel more than anything else in the world, and I found ways in which that I could travel with the strip. The strip would help me travel. I'd go to conferences, I could go to exhibitions in other countries. And so, and then I got connected with Habitat for Humanity. And so how I've let Grandma blossom is that she's become this adventurer now after this, and she's the one who gets to travel the world. And any trip that Grandma is taking in the strip, I've taken that trip. So, okay.
Yeah, well, you talked to me earlier about what this character being introduced and where he went. So this is Officer Jackson. I just want to let you talk about that.
I was at the beach. I had gone to the beach with my husband's family for a week, but I had work to take with me. So they were all off having fun, and I had to sit in the cabin and do a week's worth of strips. I had to write. I didn't have to draw, but I said at least write a week's worth of strips. Was my goal for the day. And I didn't have any ideas, and I thought, well, okay, so you start with the first day is Monday, and you got a mom, she's a working mom. What are Mondays like? Well, I've been that mom, and what it usually is that you're late and you speed on your way to work because you're late because somebody called and forgot something, you had to go back. And I, in my momming years, was pulled over many times on Hilliard between 30th and 11th. By seemingly the same motorcycle cop. They probably all have aviator glasses and mustaches, but and that's all you see. So,
I think they hand out the moustache with the glasses.
So, and I was frequently let off, but because it was always so extenuating circumstances and sweet, and I just pushed that yellow light a little too far. So I thought, well, okay, so she's late for work, and all these other things have happened. What worse can happen? That's a great way to start a comic strip. What's the worst thing that could happen here? Well, she could get a speeding ticket. So I wrote this. Actually, this isn't the first one, but I wrote a strip where she's basically saying what else could go wrong, and then here's and there he comes. Well, I wrote the first one and I liked it, and so then I wrote the second one, and then I got to this one because in the second one he's sort of, why is everybody so stressed? Why can't people slow down? Why doesn't the world? And she's like, are you some kind of Zen cop? And then we get to this, and she says, you're letting me go without a ticket. And he says, just this once. You look like a woman under a lot of pressure. Kids at home, full-time job, overbooked schedule. I'm guessing you're carrying this load by yourself. The last thing you need is a ticket. Are you for real? Ever since the sensitivity training, I can't help myself. Well, what happens after this is that she goes on about her day. She goes home. Her sister says, well, what do you mean he let you off? And, well, he just, thought I looked stressed and tired. And she said, no. Did he ask you out? She's like, she was so offended. It's like, no, he didn't ask me out. Well, he shows up at the door. Now, this is something a police officer would never do. I acknowledge they would never follow someone home, but it's a comic strip. So he shows up at her door and indeed wants to ask her out. And she's, And he just wormed his way into the strip. And by the end of the week, I had created a character I was now stuck with. And I really liked him. And, of course, everybody loved that Val had a romantic interest now. And the motorcycle thing is fun. I had to call Eugene Police Department and convince the motor officers to let me photograph someone because it's really hard to draw the uniform and the bike with any accuracy. And so one of the motor officers met me in a parking lot while he was on rounds one day, and I got to take all these pictures, and he let me sit on the bike, which is very cool. Doesn't even have a kickstand. It just like sits there, and you can step on it, and it doesn't tilt. It's amazing. And so Officer Jackson just became a real favorite. And the main problem is that I refused to let the second independent woman in the strip get married. It's like the premise of the strip would change too much if Val also got married. Mm-hmm. And so the dance is to keep Officer Jackson at a distance without making it seem like Val isn't a nice person. Mm-hmm. So they're just sort of mutually comfortable being a dating couple, and that's where we try to keep it.
So you were talking about your compositional method there, and you said you were writing and not drawing. Did the ideas for you begin with writing, or do they sometimes you draw a funny drawing and a strip comes around that, or?
Well, with some of the characters lend themselves to a funny drawing first, like Max and the dog, and so sometimes just doodling those characters, especially if I'll tell you my little secret. If you'll know that I'm really brain dead when I do a lot of strips about the dog, because I have dogs and I love dogs, and I can always write for the dog when I've got nothing else going on or I'm distracted by something. But usually I sit with a notebook and I write little conversations. They look like little scripts, little screenplays, And
so you begin with dialogue.
I just begin with dialogue. I just write dialogue.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I remember. I mean, Schultz said that he only ever began with a drawing. That all the ideas started with a pencil sketch of one of the characters.
Yeah.
So it's very. But other people, obviously, it's interesting that you begin with dialogue.
Yeah, I almost always start with dialogue.
We have a selection of strips that you described to me as some of your favorites. So I'm just going to put them up, and you can say something about them. This is a great one.
This is my living room. I have grandchildren, and so I've been a mother, and you don't forget everything about being a mother, but you do forget some of the details. And now I have grandsons, and they can mess up my house in a way that I forgot, things happen, the variety of things that end up. And so this line came from my youngest daughter. I have soccer mom aspirations with slacker mom results. And I just took a picture of my, well, actually, I was at her house, and her kids did this to her house. I came home and destroyed my house in the same fashion, including unzipping you see how it's unzipped, the cushion on the couch there, and everything I could remember, the toys. I have toys for the kids, and those are my cowboy boots, and I was going to paint my living room, so I threw that thing out there. And I just tried to wreck my living room in exactly the same way, the cord of the phone and all that stuff. And I took a picture of it and put it on a light table and drew it. And I just thought it made such it's the perspective and the Oregon rain outside and whatever's dripping down the wall there, I have no idea. But it just, to me, it was just like a comic strip to be really proud of, because it's just so fun to look at. It's what made me fall in love with cartooning in the first place as a child, is laying on top of the Sunday Funnies and losing myself inside the drawings. And that was, we don't have the space that used to be afforded cartoons to often do this, but when you can have one big panel, it's a lot of fun to do.
The multiple angles there are really
I
nice.
couldn't have done that without the photo. And a lot of people take photos to draw from, especially in comics, actually. But Lynn Johnson does a lot of work with photos to get her backgrounds and things.
Let's see what else we also have. Well, this is a
This
is a joke you've used more than once.
This is an extremely early gag, and it's one of my favorites. And I've been able to use it in other venues. So you can see the quality of the drawing, how early this is. Do you ever think about getting married again, Val? And she says, "You mean when I can't open a jar or something?" She's so cynical. "You're so unromantic, and you have a terrible track record when it comes to men. But don't you miss waking up to that reassuring warmth and strength every day?" "Nope." "Why not?" "I bought a coffee maker with a timer." So this gag was really popular, and it got reprinted quite a few times. And so when I had a contract with a greeting card company for a period of time, I redid it. And that's this. And I just took that short gag, and of course they've graduated from coffee to margaritas here or something. So. But it's a very enduring gag, and I still like the sentiment. And it isn't really about men and women. It's about whether you want to be in a relationship or not, whether you want to be independent or not, whether you're going to rely on a relationship to make your life better, or, you know.
Is it the same? Have your materials changed at all in terms of pens, or is it this is just as you become more confident?
Yeah.
So it's the same equipment. And everything. And what do you use, by the way? Is it
I draw with a Gillette 303. The only thing that might have changed is the lettering pen. I used to letter with a Speedball A5, but I gave up on those. The quality kind of dropped off with computers and technology, and so I just letter with Micron pens now. But I draw with a Gillette 305. It's a dip pen, like a crow quill, a little heavier. A lot of cartoonists do work with a brush. Garfield, Calvin and Hobbes, Zitz are all done with a brush, which, think about that the next time you look at it, because it's incredible, the control they have. I could never learn to use a brush that way. But Jim Borgman paid me a great compliment. He's the Zitz artist. He said, "I so admire your pen work. I never could learn to use a pen." I thought, well, all right, thank you so much.
Let's see. We've also got, this one resonated with me because there was a period in my own life where friends of my mother's had to come and live in our house because the marriage had ended and they had nowhere else to go. And this, sort of talks about how people can be stranded in that kind of way. But also, of course, the daughter saying, "If my life falls apart, I can go live with Aunt Joan," is the moral she's absorbed here.
Yeah. This is it's really fun to write for Holly. She's in middle school, and I have a lot of fun writing for her. And I have led a broad and varied life full of mistakes. So a lot of times when I'm writing Holly being obnoxious or having short-sightedness, I'm writing about myself from years ago. But yeah, so Val says, "Holly, it's important for a woman to plan for her own financial security. Remember what it was like when Aunt Joan, when her first husband left? Joan's husband went out for milk one night and ended up in the Virgin Islands. It's the kind of guy he was. Remember when Aunt Joan, when her first husband left, she had to come live with us. What does that teach you? If my life falls apart, I can go live with Aunt Joan. She owes us." That's how a 13-year-old would think. Yeah.
I love the way that Val's mouth in that last
It
image
sinks
has
down
sort of
into
dropped
her
right
chin,
down
yeah,
into the
yeah,
chin
yeah.
there. You weren't always doing that.
Yeah.
That's quite that's a risky distortion.
And the conversation in the car, if you've raised children, think of how many conversations you maybe didn't even want to have you had in the car because you were trapped. Yeah, on both sides, the kid with the parent with the kid, goes both ways.
Okay, so
Oh, this is fun. I did a whole series where did it 2 or 3 times where I really like inviting other characters into the strip, and I created a book club for Val that other characters that I like from other comic strips could be part of. And so, is this the only one you put up?
yes.
Okay.
I think so.
So the first one that I did was with the mother Connie from I just gave it away. Connie from Zitz. How many of you knew that was her name? Okay, one nerd right down here in the front. Oh, and okay, that person. There's another nerd back there. Well, they don't use Connie's name very much in the strip, and I was thinking about the fact that I didn't know what her name was, and I didn't know what she did for a living. And if you read the very first Zitz book, it says that she's a child psychologist, but that doesn't come into the strip at all anymore. So I was talking to Jerry Scott, who writes Zitz. Zitz is done by 2 people. It's drawn by Jim Borgman. It's written by Jerry Scott. And Jerry Scott also writes Baby Blues. He's a very talented, and he drew and wrote Nancy for 17 years. So he's a very talented cartoonist. And I had asked him to critique some of my work. I'd sent him one of my books and asked him to give me any advice he had. And he just offhandedly said in the conversation, he said, I don't know why Zitz is so successful. I think it's because it's about a boy, and most editors are boys, and they just like it better. And it just pissed me off. And not at him, but just like, oh, God, are we still, is this still the world? And so the first one of these I did was Connie coming in, being introduced to Ellie from For Better or For Worse. And my character, Val, says to Ellie, do you know Jeremy's mom? And she just loses. Jeremy's mom, Jeremy's mom. No one knows my name. I'm just Jeremy's mom. So I didn't ask any of my cartoonist friends if I could do this, but I did a whole, many weeks of their characters making appearances in my strip. And this is one of the last ones, right before Joan has a baby with Wally. And this is Alice, one of my favorite, Alice Fist of Death from Dilbert. And I just loved putting her in here. And basically Joan is telling her that she's not going to find out what the sex of the baby is before it's born. And Joan is also having a home birth. And Alice says, a home birth of a baby of undetermined gender. How quaint. Do you and your husband reject all science? My midwife graduated from Yale. So anyway, it's a lot of fun to bring other characters in. It's one of those do it and ask for forgiveness later kind of things. I didn't ask for permission. I just did it. It's considered sort of an homage, but it's a huge responsibility because you're now taking over. You're going to represent someone else's character, and you want to do it justice. So photocopiers and light tables are a huge help when it comes to this.
But nobody ever reacted?
Everyone loved it. Yeah, everyone loved it. Everyone was very gracious. I sent originals out to people if they asked for them. And
That's great. Well, while we're talking about, you talked a little about the contemporary cartoonists. Maybe we could talk a bit about influences. This was a French cartoonist who I actually didn't know until you mentioned it to me. So that's
anyone in the
Breton.
room know Claire Bretisher? One person. Claire Bretisher, the closest I could describe her is she's the Gary Trudeau of France. She's done years and years of social commentary cartoons for a major magazine in France. She doesn't have a daily strip. That's not so common in Europe. She does a page, sort of like Linda Barry used to do in Esquire, a whole page cartoon. And
we have another image from her, right? Is that right? Or
no, that's mine.
That's not. Yeah,
that's okay.
That's you talking about the influence.
Yes,
yeah. Okay.
So go back to that.
All right.
So one of her teenage characters is Agrippina, and this is her. And whenever I feel like I haven't made Holly snarky enough in a while, I read Agrippina for a while because, first of all, in France you can take everything a little farther, and you can take it in the United States, and her stuff is just wonderful. So this is Agrippina, and then the next one is
it's Holly.
Holly, yeah.
Right.
So Claire Bretisher was a big influence on me, especially the writing. The artwork Well, and the artwork. Agrippina's got a great look to her.
Let's see, you also mentioned this is the great Mary Patty. I think this is an astonishing image.
This Mary Petty was an early New Yorker cartoonist. There were a lot of women in the New Yorker in the 20s and 30s, more than there are now. And Mary Petty was wonderful. She did these kind of ghoulish things. And this is actually a maid. And the maids always had their aprons tied so they kind of looked like butterflies. And she's trying on a gas mask. And I can only imagine that this is like between the world wars or something, you know, that brought this idea about. I don't actually know the context. But it's just such a ghoulish, lovely
Well, Gain
image.
Wilson would kill to come up with an idea that good.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
So when did you discover Mary Patty?
When I first got interested, when I first started publishing in the first magazine or newspaper, I would go to Powell's in Portland and just scour the shelves for old stuff. And I found a collection of Mary Petty, a lot of old New Yorker stuff, Helen Hawkinson, Mary Petty. And
Oh yeah, we have some
Helen
too.
Hawkinson. Helen Hawkinson is the absolute classic New Yorker cartoonist. She is the one who drew the Garden Club ladies, and she was in the New Yorker up until 1957, I think. She actually died in a plane crash on her very first plane trip. It's very sad, but she had been in the New Yorker, I think, for 17 years, and how she worked. She wrote about society ladies, and she and a theater friend, a man, would walk the city every Friday, and they would go, you know, to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and they would just walk through Manhattan Central Park and listen to people. And he would make notes and she would make sketches, and then they would go have dinner and drink, and they would do cartoons together. And then on Monday, or whatever day of the week it was, they submitted to the New Yorker, and their stuff would go in. And they did that for years and years.
So you discovered both of these figures around the same time?
Yeah.
And of course, this is the more contemporary newspaper strips. So this is Lynn Johnson, who prior to Stone Soup, I guess is really sort of the foundational figure in the Modern Family comic strip in the last 30 years.
Lynn, I have it was said to me, it was literally said to me in the mid-'80s, we have Lynn, we have Kathy, why do we need you?
Wow.
Because there was this idea that it's like there's a, you know, actually it's like a quota. I mean, I believe that African American cartoonists are still struggling with this today. We have Curtis, we don't need any more. We have whatever, you know, Canterville, we don't need any more. So there was this idea that there was just space for this, some type of humor that we were supposedly doing, you know. And really, I mean, High and Lois is a family strip, and this done by a man. I mean, it's just, it makes no sense. But anyway, it was said to me, and it was a bit of a challenge, and it was challenging me to separate myself. And Lynn was a big influence on me, not so much, well, in her day, first of all, she was willing to say things that a lot of very frank things, kind of like Schultz did actually, that were not in the classic cartoon vein. And she was, it seems very mild and gentle now, but in the 70s when she first started, it was a very feminist strip, and she was saying things that other women weren't saying.
I mean, in a strip like this, it's sort of, it's not funny. It's
Right.
kind of courageous to
Right.
do a strip which isn't particularly funny.
Yeah.
And you know, to know that you can.
Yeah. And she was a great friend to me, gave me a lot of mentoring and advice before I got syndicated. She was very, very helpful to me. But my goal was to be somewhere in between, for better, for worse, and Calvin and Hobbes. I just admired Calvin and Hobbes more than anything in the world, and I knew I would never be Bill Watterson. But I wanted to push the strip a little bit away from the sweetness of For Better, for Worse, into the fantasy of Calvin and Hobbes. Because
Okay.
she doesn't do fantasy.
No, not at all.
And I like things like the Magic Pool, and so.
I have some examples of Calvin and Hobbes, but you also mentioned Gary Trudeau, and so I just pulled this off the web quickly because it's being rude about Rick Perry.
Yeah. Gary Trudeau has been a huge hero to me, and Joni, if anybody read Trudeau in the 70s, you know the history of Joni Caucus. And for me, I kind of grew up with Joni Caucus, and I were the same age, and you know, watching her in the early days, working in a daycare center, deciding to apply to law school. I mean, it was wonderful stuff. So he's a great feminist and a great man.
But obviously not an influence in terms of visual style, particularly.
No,
or
not in terms of visual. He's I don't know. He's so unique. You know, he's just kind of his own thing.
Yeah, I mean, frequently there's not, you know, it's 4 panels of the White House with a changing
Yeah,
speech balloon.
yeah,
It's not
yeah.
even really drawing.
Yeah.
But as opposed to this, which is,
Yeah.
you know, this is a sort of the
Yeah.
high art of cartooning. I think this is about as high as the art
Yeah.
form can get.
I think the thing that I've learned more from, I learned more about drawing cartoons from Watterson than anyone else. I have all the collections by my table. And when I feel like the drawings are just getting too stiff and too unimaginative, I look through a Watterson book because his ability, his fluidity, the way the characters move, it's just lovely. And I you know, space allowing, try to, you know, incorporate some of that fluidity and
Well, this is all you can, you know, this, if you know the kinds of dance routines from the movies that this is obviously inspired by, you can hear the shifts. You can, this is an
Yeah.
audible cartoon.
Yep.
Yeah, with no sound effects
Yeah.
at all. This is a, you know, entirely audible cartoon. I think it's amazing.
And his facial expressions, Calvin's facial expressions, and then just the humor. It's just, I mean, Watterson, more than anybody, I think, has this ability to write a cartoon about a little boy and a stuffed tiger and make it be about the world and about politics and about, you know, he writes about humanity. It's just really, I really aspire to do what he does.
And of course, one of his biggest influences was Schultz.
Yeah.
There would be no Calvin and Hobbes without the first 25 years of Peanuts,
Yeah.
and Watterson has
Yeah.
acknowledged that influence many times. So now this might be the segue for you to talk a bit about your. How about that, folks? The neat segue. You'd think we'd rehearsed or something. For you to talk about your friendship with Sparky, as everybody called him.
Sparky.
Yes.
Sparky was the name he went by if you knew him personally. I met, Lynn Johnson introduced me to Charles Schulz in 1996 once you become a syndicated cartoonist and you can claim, or any kind of cartoonist who can claim that 60% of your income is from cartooning, you can apply to join the National Cartoonist Society. So as soon as I got syndicated, I applied to join. Lynn sponsored me in. This is an interesting organization. Their first female member was in the 72, I think. So it's they used to have all their meetings in Playboy clubs, and because a lot of them were Playboy cartoonists, you know. So it's an interesting collection of very nice, but kind of got an old boy feel. And Lynn and Kathy Geiswhite were members, and Lynn sponsored me, and she wanted me to meet Sparky. So the first morning of the weekend, there's a convention every year. She said, she came and got me at breakfast. She said, "Come on, I want you to meet Sparky." And she drags me across the room. Well, at this point in time, he has Parkinson's. He's shaking. He's walking across the room with like a little saucer with a little teacup and a little Danish on another thing, and everything's shaking and the cup is rattling, and he's trying to get to the table. And Lynn, who's very unabashed, stopped him midway and said, "Sparky, I really want you to meet a new cartoonist. This is Jan." And I think he might have been glad to meet me, but really he just wanted to sit down. And so I felt really awkward and uncomfortable, and, you know, okay, yeah, it's nice to meet you, thanks, you know. So that weekend passed. I got to see him. I have to tell this other story. There's a meeting, and the people, they just, you know, there's presidents and vice presidents and treasurers, and they give all the reports. And Mort Walker, who does Beetle Bailey, had this idea. He was trying to build a museum in Boca Raton, Florida, which turned out to be a big flop, unfortunately, but it was a big project at the time, a cartoon art museum. And he stood up and proposed to the group that at the morning meeting that every time you get a request for an autograph, which happens a lot in cartooning, you should charge $5 and you should send it to the Boca Raton Museum, because this was going to be our museum and it was for us and we should help fundraise. So I'm watching, and I'm all in awe because, you know, I don't know any of these people. So I'm listening to that. And then Sparky gets up, and he's a pretty tall man. And he kind of stands up slowly and gets taller and taller, right behind Mort Walker. And he says, "That's the stupidest idea I've ever heard." And I thought, oh, well, this group's going to be kind of fun. It turns out there was not much love lost between the two of them. And if you think about how different, I'll talk about that more later, but they were very different men. So anyway, at the end of this weekend, I went home feeling kind of bad about my introduction to Charles Schulz. And so I had just published my first book, and I stuck it in the mail to him, and I just wrote him a note and said, I really enjoyed meeting you, and I always admired your work. And I didn't tell him at the time that I had totally learned lettering from looking at Peanuts. I'd stolen all his lettering as best I could. Anyway, I sent that off, and within, I think it was a matter of days, maybe a week, another Monday morning, the phone rings, and I picked up the phone, and I said hello, and this person said, is this Jan Eliot? And I said, yeah. And he said, this is Charles Schulz. And I honestly thought one of my friends was pulling my leg. I really, really thought somebody was pulling my leg, and I sort of stumbled. I said, hello? And he said, this is Charles Schulz. How are you today? I said, I'm fine. And, he told me that he'd gotten my book, and he just wanted to chat. We just had this whole conversation, and so we talked, and he wanted, I felt like I was being interviewed. He's like, well, who are your favorite cartoonists? Who are some of your influences? And another cartoonist that I really liked was Percy Crosby, another vintage cartoonist. And I struck gold there because that was someone he really idolized. And if you dig out Percy Crosby, you'll see that there's a lot of resemblance to what Schulz was doing.
Your collection has just come out, if you're curious.
Yeah,
actually. It
little
hasn't been
boy.
available for years.
Yeah, little boy with the world on his shoulders, sitting on the curb. A lot of things you can see Peanuts influences there. So I said the right things, and we had a nice conversation. And then he invited me to come to Santa Rosa for a party that he had for cartoonists every December. And so that began a 4-year friendship. Unfortunately, I did not meet him until '96, and he died in 2000. So I just knew him for 4 years.
We have
the
letter
letter?
that
Oh,
he
this
received,
is good.
Yeah.
This says, this is the third letter. I received 3 letters from him, one critiquing my first book, which he really liked. Well, actually, I received 4 letters. I received one in the 80s where he told me I needed to learn how to draw. This
might be easier for you to read off the screen if you can't read it from there.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I will.
There you go.
It says, so first of all, Charles M. Schulz Creative Associates, 1 Snoopy Place, Santa Rosa, California. 1997. Dear Jan, thank you for the funny birthday card. I appreciate you remembering me. I was very impressed with the cartoon book you drew about camp. When I was 13, I went to a music camp and remember the Love Is Peanuts series and Happiness Is a Warm Puppy, all that stuff. I guess he did Happiness Is, not Love Is. I did Camp Is, and I totally copied all his characters, and I did these cartoons about my experience at this music camp. So I had sent him some. He said, I was very impressed with the cartoon book you drew about camp. It's just too bad you couldn't have found some better cartoons to copy. Looking forward to seeing you at the ice show, your friend Sparky. So that was so his generation and him, that sort of self-deprecating humor. Too bad you couldn't found something better to copy than some Peanuts cartoons. So every December he would create a new ice show at the Santa Rosa ice rink, which he built for the city of Santa Rosa. And it was Snoopy on Ice. And the first weekend, the opening weekend, he would invite all his cartoonist friends, anyone who could come to it, and then there'd be a party, a brunch the next morning after. So this is the first one I went to, and I'd like to point out, let's see, I'll start at the left here, because there's just some amazing people in this. Unfortunately, he had to bend away from the camera to let a little woman come through our group, but the tall blonde woman, I can't remember her name, it's Sergio Aragones and his wife, anyway, the great Mad Magazine cartoonist, Sergio Aragones. The woman here with the gray and the white blouse looking down is Selby Kelly. She was married to Walt Kelly. She was an animator with Hanna-Barbera for years and years in her own right, and married to Walt Kelly and carried on Pogo after his death for a number of years, mostly to pay off his medical bills because he wasn't one of the lucky cartoonists to get really rich. And then the little girl with the woman in red behind her and the little girl in black and then the man in white right in the middle there, that's the Kirkman family. That's the creator of Baby Blues and his family. And then the African-American gentleman here in the lower corner, that is my God, Wee Pals.
Curtis, no,
What's his name?
I met him this year too, and I can't remember.
You can't either.
No.
It'll come to me. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. I'm so bad with names. He was a really good friend of Sparky's, and he created Maury Turner. Sorry.
There you go.
Maury Turner and his wife, there in the black sweater with the white turtleneck. He created a strip called Wee Pals. It was his goal to have multiracial Peanuts. That's what he was literally trying to do, was his version of Peanuts. It's still in print, Wee Pals. He's a wonderful man. I think he's about 85 now. And then in the green shirt on the far right is Mark Cohen. He was a great friend of Sparky's. Sparky is right behind him with the red sweater, just peeking out, the white hair and the red sweater. He was a collector and a broker, and he brokered a lot of Peanuts cartoons. And then there's Michael Jancy, who did the Norm, a few other cartoonists in here. But this was my first experience. I've just been syndicated a year, and I get to go down to this party, and this was the brunch after. And right after we took this photo, Sparky was looking at my book, and one of the things he asked me was, he said, "I really like your book, and how did you learn to letter so well?" And I looked at him and I said, well, truthfully, I just copied you. I copied you. The only thing I think I do differently is the Y. I think I do a different Y form than he does, but I really did study Peanuts lettering.
That was his first professional gig, did you?
Lettering, yeah.
The very first thing he was hired to do for the St. Paul Catholic paper.
I
was
won
the
every
lettering.
penmanship contest all through grade school. That's all my only claim to fame for lettering. So he was admiring the lettering, and we were talking, and he said, "Do you want to see the studio?" Yeah. So he said, "Well, follow me." And so he gets in his Jaguar, and I get in my rental car, Ford something, who knows. And we're driving across Santa Rosa, and I was alone. And it was like, why is there not anybody here who could? I'm just shouting in the car, "I'm following Charles Schulz across Santa Rosa. I'm going," So he took me to the studio, and it was a Sunday. It was empty, and we wandered around, and he sat. I didn't take this picture. This is a generic picture, but he sat just like that at that table, which he had been drawing on since he was 20 years old, and drew for me. And it was just so amazing. And at this time, his tremors were pretty bad, and it was so cool though to watch, because he'd pick up the pen and dip it and shake and go, and then he'd hit the paper, and he could draw. But if you look at this exhibit, you can see the shakes. I mean, you can see the shakes appearing in the later strips. And in fact, he started drawing he had drawn really big in the, if you look at the,
50s.
and if you look at those strips, also look for the crease, because he just folded those in half and stuck them in a 10 by 12 envelope and mailed them to the syndicate. That's how they went. And then he was drawing smaller for a while, and then he went back up to drawing bigger, because the bigger you draw, the more your little mistakes don't show up when it gets reduced down. So when the shake was getting kind of bad, that it was more beneficial to draw bigger again and then reduce it down. But yeah, that was truly amazing. It was really amazing.
Well, you've already shared some of your most vivid memories of him. But you did start to talk about the differences between him and someone like Mort Walker, and his attitude towards maybe being different towards women cartoonists. I mean, he's interesting for a man of doing cartoons of his generation, in the number of very strong female characters in the strip, vocal supporter of Title IX from very early on, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what
He was
could you
friends
say
with Billie Jean King, wasn't he?
Very close
Very
friends
close
with
friends
Billie
with Billie Jean King, yeah.
Yeah, he said he could just put her name in the strip and she'd call him up. So there's a whole series in the 80s and 90s where he just makes what seems
that's
like
great.
where Snoopy is just referencing her, so that it was his
So that
way
she'll
of getting,
call.
yeah.
Oh, that's great.
But can you say something about why you think that world was so sexist, and what made him different, and how sexist does this world of newspaper cartooning remain? I mean,
Well, I don't know why he was different. All you have to do, if you realize that he and Mort Walker, and Mort Walker is a lovely man. Please don't think that I don't like Mort Walker. He's a very nice man, and he was also helpful to me. But they're very different men. And if you think that Mort Walker created Miss Buxley, and Charles Schulz created Peppermint Patty, and that's the difference. And do you have that peppermint patty?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. So I asked him, I'm going to read this whole thing and you're going to love it. Because Mort Walker and no other man of Schultz's generation could have written this strip. I could have written this strip. And I'm amazed that Sparky wrote it, because what you realize is a lot of men write about women. Greg Evans writes Luann, and it's a lovely strip, but a lot of times when I read it, I know it's observational. He's not living that life. He's writing about it. He sees it in his daughter. He sees it in his wife. He's reporting what he sees. This strip is written, I know that Sparky felt everything in this strip. And that's why I say I could have written it. This is what I feel, and I'm amazed that he wrote this. He did not make this up. Someone did not tell him this is how they were feeling, and therefore he wrote it. He felt this. And I love sports, by the way, and I love women's sports. I love women's basketball, but I watch everything. And so they're watching, and it says, and those are our scores. And she says, what do you mean those are our scores? They did it again. They didn't say a thing about women's sports. And those games are not... all those games and not one mention of a woman. I'm going to get on a bus, Marcy, and go down to that TV station and complain. Every sports show is the same. Men, 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 men. And never any women's sports. We want to speak to the manager of this TV station. They get let in. We've come to complain about your sports broadcasts. You never give the scores of women's sports. It's always men. What about women? Now they're leaving. That was odd, wasn't it, sir? What was odd? The station manager was a woman. Really? I didn't even notice. Our bus driver is a woman too, sir. Ask her what the score is, Marcy. That was written in the mid-'80s. That is a very thoughtful, broad feminist strip. And I mean, even the ask her what the score is, Marcy, is an interesting little twist on things. There's no women's sports scores on the radio broadcast, but the station manager is a woman and the bus driver is a woman, so what is the score? You know, it's this whole balancing. These are thoughts that he really had. He was a true, when you spoke to him as a woman cartoonist, and there are darn few of us, especially in syndicated cartooning. I mean, there are about 250 syndicated comic strips in the United States, and about 12 of them are done by women. And so, you know, when I go to a convention, it's me and maybe one other woman, and, you know, we try to get each other to go and band together. But Sparky treated you just like a colleague. Whereas someone like Mort Walker, who is, again, a nice and generous man, treats you like, you know, he's one of those men who doesn't know how to talk to a woman unless he's flirting or unless he's patting in some fashion, or, you know, father-daughter, or, you know, but not colleague. And Sparky really addressed you like me, like a colleague. And he was very close friends with Lynn Johnson and with Kathy Guys-White, and it's not surprising because he respected their work. He respected them as cartoonists. They were not women cartoonists to him. They were fellow cartoonists, and he wanted to know what they thought. When I went to one of the ice shows, he asked me, he stopped and he said, I've got this idea about Linus not being able to open the zipper on his Bible during Sunday school. Is that funny? It's like, you want to ask me if this is, you know, if this is funny? He was just unique. He was very unique. And so I really appreciate that I was able to get to know him, because I felt like gender wasn't a thing with Sparky. It's like we were two cartoonists happy to be where we were, that we get to do this work we get to do. And and you know, Peppermint Patty wears Birkenstocks. She wears Birkenstocks.
Could you say a little bit more about what you think are the most important and maybe distinctive things about the strip? You specifically asked me to find this one, which was also was quite popular with my students last week. I made the mistake of actually teaching this cartoon the day I returned papers.
Oh, good.
I will never make that mistake again.
I'm not going to read all this because I think you've all probably read it, but I'll tell you what it's about. This is where, is this Sally?
Yes,
Sally
this is
gets
Sally
a C on an art project. Yeah. And you know that this must have happened to Sparky or to his child or a grandchild. They got a C on an art project, and this is a rant about how on earth do you grade an art project, and how does it deserve a C? I think that this really embodies in a way why Charles Schulz was so different from so many other cartoonists of his generation. First of all, the Beetle Bailey, Dennis the Menace, High and Lois, Blondie, all those strips were written by gag writers. They were not written by the cartoonist. Cartoonists considered themselves to be artists, and the gag was just something that you made brilliant by illustrating it. Sparky was completely devoted to writing his own material, and that was extremely unique in the time. None of his contemporaries would have written their own material. Walt Kelly, of course, wrote all his own material, the Pogo creator, but that was a little bit later. But Sparky was one of the first. He set the bar really high for original material because he wrote everything himself. And despite his question to me about the Bible joke, he rarely asked for input from anybody about whether something was funny or approval or anything.
And he hated it when people offered ideas.
Oh, yeah. He did not like to be offered ideas at all.
You know what you should do? Say, I don't take ideas for this
that's
trip.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
So this is such an original concept here. This isn't a classic cartoon gag by any means. This is an observation on life and art and society. And he really took that to new heights with Peanuts, even in the most simplest strips. They were so much more of a comment on society than something that was gag based, like Dennis the Menace and Beetle Bailey and the other strips that he was, or that it were his contemporaries.
What about the visual technique? I mean, this is a nice one because it's got that great scream, and I've been thinking about the challenge that I've had teaching this stuff in talking about. It's very easy to talk about his themes and the things that make the writing of the strip original. It's surprisingly difficult to talk about the art. Because it looks so simple, and the longer he did it, the flatter and simpler it actually becomes in some ways. But you have this quite, these risky abstract. I mean, that's an Edvard Munch moment from
The Scream.
Yeah.
It's odd because if you think about it's a very static artwork. He doesn't. A lot of what we admire in cartoon art, he does not do. I mean, the characters are either facing forward or they're sideways. They're almost never three-quarter. I don't think they ever are, really.
He stopped doing it. He doesn't even, even buildings. He stopped doing the doghouse three-quarter when Snoopy started lying on the top.
Lying on top, yeah.
Because that doesn't work.
So everything got very flat. He's really good at using black, which you don't think about black space and white space, but you are being impressed by it when you see this. But really, he didn't do anything spectacular. He just drew these very unique and simple characters. And, they're all out of proportion. Their heads are too big and their legs are too short, and that makes them fit in the frame. So I think, personally, that the writing is what carries Peanuts. And the artwork is so unique and so wonderful that it makes it. It all makes it together. It's this great thing. But I think without the great writing, I'm not sure that the strip would have been what it is.
It's interesting because, he himself, of course, said it began with a drawing always for him. It was always a drawing that came first. And that you were trying to do a funny... So if the drawing made him laugh, then there was...
Yeah. Well, and these are real people to us. I mean, if he starts drawing Linus, he based that on something in his life, and Linus has certain feelings about certain things, and maybe Linus is the character he draws on a rainy day or on a day when he doesn't feel well, or he just wants the blanket, or I don't know. I'm not in his head, but you start drawing those characters, and you're not just drawing the character. You're thinking about that character and what's going on in their head because you know them so well. And so I imagine when he drew, it just sparked ideas.
Yeah, I think he didn't even... I remember reading him saying that he didn't even like finishing the work as much because by that point it was no longer funny for him. It was in the spontaneous sketches that he was amusing himself. Draw a picture of Snoopy with a bow tie and a briefcase, and suddenly, he's Oliver Wendell Holmes. And that was funny on a sketch pad. But then when he built a strip around it, it had become... which is also why he didn't like to pencil too much because it kept it spontaneous.
The pencil sketches are so full of life, but to keep the ink full of life, it's better to have a really sparse pencil sketch so that you're doing more. You're not tracing when you do the ink. Yeah.
So I think this may be a good point to turn to the audience for questions if anybody has any. And I know that because we're recording this, Sharon has the mic. So if you do have a question, we would like you to ask it into the microphone. There are a couple of hands raised.
What did Sparky draw for you? You mentioned he drew for you. What did he draw for you?
He drew a Charlie Brown and a Snoopy, and I knew better than to ask for it. I wanted so badly to ask for it. But at that point in time, he'd been asked for so much in his life that you just didn't ask if it was offered, but but he didn't give it to me. He drew it and he stuck it in a drawer. So, Ben was just telling me that the Schultz Museum actually only has 3,000 original peanuts,
3,000 or so, yeah.
which is basically a year's worth out of 50 years. So at the time that he was drawing that for me, every single drawing was becoming really precious and actually living in a safe.
Up until about 1958, 59, if you just wrote to him and asked for original, he would send it to you. There was no... this was a period when an original comic art was not particularly valued. The value was in its reproduction. Once it had been reproduced, they had no sense of its value. So he just mailed. He only stopped doing that because he could no longer answer all his own mail by about 1960. But he answered all his mail up until about 1958, 59. And if you asked for one of these, he would send it to you.
If you visited King Features, United Media was his syndicate in New York, any of the syndicates in New York, and you went into it because you wanted to tour, the front reception desk, there was like a box underneath, almost like a trash can, and the strips that had already been reproduced and were going to be returned to the cartoonists were just thrown down there. And if someone felt so inclined because you were someone they wanted to impress, they would pull one out and say, well, you want to take one of these home with you? So, no more.
Another question that way if you want to pass it along. Thank you.
One of the things I've noticed that you touched on with the character of Alice is that over the last several years there's been more moving back and forth of characters between comic strips and also comic strip events where people are all working together. The drawers are on a certain theme or event.
Oh, yeah.
And I wonder what has brought that more out into the open, and is it something that's worked through the organization that you belong to?
Well, I'll address the events first. The National Cartoonist Society is frequently asked to try and organize events. Someone with a cause will say, could we have tribute to the 9/11 tragedy, on this particular day, on Thanksgiving, on the anniversary of or whatever. And if they deem it worthy, they'll put it out to cartoonists and say, if you want to participate in this, this is what we're going to do. They don't do those too often because it's kind of a lot to ask, but it's nice to do once in a while. It's something like that. The moving of characters between strips can be anything from somebody of lesser stature trying to grab greater stature by pulling somebody in. But one of the characters, Bill Keane, who created Family Circus, is absolutely beloved among cartoonists. He's like the nicest man on the planet. And Family Circus has gone from being popular to being corny to being like downright cult status now. Linda Berry, you all know Linda Berry. She's this wacky. That is her favorite cartoon on the planet. And you can't say anything bad about little Jeffy or she will beat you up. And she is one tough cookie. But when she grew up, she had a kind of dysfunctional, very difficult household. And that little circle, that little world was like her little perfect life that she could drop into. And so anyway, people because Bill Keane is so beloved and because Family Circus has now kind of got this cult-like status, bringing Family Circus into strips like Pearls Before Swine has a particular humor to it because they're so different. And yet Bill Keane loved stuff like that. He was not sacred about what he did in Family Circus, and so it didn't offend him, that you might do something untoward with his characters, to a point.
And there's no copywriting or anything of characters.
Yes, there is, but it's one of those sort of, oh yeah, I mean, if I tried to do anything with a Disney character, they'd be here right now. They're probably in the hall at this very moment. But
Sparky has an early Peanuts where he has Snoopy doing a Mickey Mouse impression, but he won't use the name Mickey Mouse. He says he assumes the audience.
it's where the ears become.
He makes his ears round and does a sort of sideways profile. It's very clear who he's doing, but he doesn't name him.
Yeah.
And you've just reminded me, actually, of course, of your own tribute to Sparky.
Oh yeah. So this was what you were asking about. Unfortunately, this was planned for the Reuben weekend, which is our big conference weekend, in 2000. And some people worked like 6 months ahead. So you do plan these things really far out. And everyone was going to do some tribute to Peanuts in their strip to celebrate Sparky. And this was when we heard he was retiring. Unfortunately, he was very ill. And despite efforts to move this date up, it didn't happen. And so he didn't get to see this before he died. He died in February, and this came out in May. But just about every cartoonist did something for Charles Schulz on that day. And this was mine. This is Biscuit trying to balance on top of the doghouse like Snoopy does. It just basically says he always made this look easy. Now I realize I don't know exactly how he did it. It's going to be harder than we thought to fill his shoes. And then at the bottom it says gone out for root beer. And I did some things here that are subtle, but those are his clouds, those little puffy things that he would draw. And then the way he used Zipatone, kind of piecing pieces together, and I kind of did that for him. Yes.
I think we probably have time to take 2 more questions. So,
You've spoken very eloquently about gender in your comic, but Officer Jackson is African American. You want to say something about the fact that it's an interracial relationship?
Officer Jackson is non-white. And the reason I don't care what he is, he's just not white. And I didn't set out to make him African American. And then there is a strip where his aunt, Auntie June, who lives up the street, talks about their heritage, which is like Portuguese, and it's a whole bunch of things, African, and a whole bunch of things. He's non-white. And I made my point where I had 2 points. One is I'm not African American, and I live in a very white environment, Oregon, mayonnaise land. And I don't feel like I have the authority to write. I didn't feel like I had the authority to write an African American character. I just wanted to write a non-white character because the world is not all white. And so, interestingly, the most vicious hate mail that I have ever gotten, and if you can imagine that I get hate mail, but there are crazy people out there, has to do with him. And when he is in a romantic setting with Val, that's usually what sparks it. And I have gotten some ugly, ugly stuff because those people are still out there, just because he's not white. It's just ridiculous. I mean, theoretically, they should all be slightly different colors. Everybody. I mean, it's just I don't think of it as an issue. It's just, but it does create an issue for some people sometimes. But I just whenever.
Sparky had a similar response when he
With
introduced
Franklin.
of course.
Yeah.
He said that he received letters from Southern newspapers objecting to him integrating the strip. The one he quotes is somebody saying, "I don't mind you introducing a black kid into the strip, but please don't ever show them in school together."
Oh God. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he said he'd already shown them in school together, so he
Yeah.
just didn't reply.
Yeah. There's my syndicate has I quit replying after a while. My syndicate has you can comment at where the strips appear, and one morning not too long ago, this is only 2 or 3 years ago, one of my friends called at 7:30 in the morning, and I thought, why are you calling me at 7:30 in the morning? And she said, you need to look at your site. You need to call your syndicate. And it was one of the strips, because Val and Officer Jackson do this dance of, are they going to get married? Are they going to stay apart? Are they going to date? How close are they going to be? And so this was in one of those periods where they're kind of I don't know, you know, the whole thing of he doesn't have kids, she has kids, he's not sure about all that, and they're having this. And someone had written, and I'm going to tone it down because there's children here, she should be cautious because he just wants to bleep his way to white. And that was on my syndicate's website. That was, you know, and they hadn't seen it yet because they don't always have eyes, you know, on things. And so I called my editor, and she has the power of God, and he was gone like that. And then watching all these other people comment, because people were great. I mean, the public will do justice, you know. People were, dude, you know, and all these comments, and all of a sudden, dude's gone, you know.
Yeah.
So, but I quit responding because it's just so ridiculous.
It would be nice to have that power in the real world.
Wouldn't it, though? Dude's
People
gone.
could- Yeah, just with the touch of a button, people could be a little. It's a good
Yeah.
thing I don't have that.
Yeah,
power. I think we maybe have just time for one more question. So wherever the mic is nearest is, you win.
I appreciated your when you wrote about going to Haiti, and I enjoy it when there is a commentary that's made by the cartoons,
Mm-hmm.
and so I guess I just wanted to get your feeling on that.
A commentary about like the situation in Haiti.
Right.
Yeah, one of the great gifts of being a cartoonist, and we try not to beat it to death, but we do get this soapbox. You know, we do have this opportunity. I have this space every day. I get to say my view on the world, and it's a great honor, and it's really fun for me to be able to put things like the situation in Haiti in the strip, to promote Habitat for Humanity, although I don't use those words, but just in general, the good things that can happen in the world. And I went to Haiti with Habitat for Humanity, and so I let Grandma have that trip. Habitat's now figured out if they send me places, I'll write about it. So so that's kind of fun. I've been to Thailand and to Haiti, but for me, it's real rewarding because you know, kind of an old activist at heart, and it's just a nice opportunity to be able to put out something that's a little more serious. I try not to make it heavy-handed, but just to keep, in Haiti's case, you know, we're just trying to keep the visibility up a little bit because things haven't really gotten much better there yet. The first Habitat strips I wrote were just Holly having a chance to go work on a Habitat house for spring break, except it wasn't a chance, it was something she felt forced to do. And she actually asked a little girl, how did you get stuck building a house for some loser family on your spring break? And when I wrote that, I thought, well, I hope that's not too strong. But I wrote it because I thought a 13-year-old can say what a lot of people think. I know a lot of people think that. And that strip sparked my relationship with Habitat. They loved that strip so much that they started reprinting strips. And so now I actually have a licensing agreement with them now, and we work together, and I create images for them. I just created a beautiful image for Cars for Homes. So if you see billboards, I'm hoping this is where you can donate your car, and it'll help build houses. But anyway, I just love doing it. It's an honor to be able to do it, and I hope that mostly people like it.
Well, Jan, thank you so much
Thank
for the
you.
time you've given us, and thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. And if you didn't get your question answered, I'll sit here for 5 minutes.
And if you didn't sign the piece of paper and you're in my class,